The Old Testament is at the origin of a religion, Judaism. But the well-known stories contained in this book, which is also called the Hebrew Bible, also recount a history, that of the creation of the world and of the people of Israel. How much of this biblical text is history and how much is legend? Israel Finkelstein and Neil Silberman continue their investigations into the society that wrote the Old Testament. We meet up with them again in Megiddo. In previous episodes, they showed that the Bible's most famous stories, those of Abraham, the patriarchs, or the Exodus, when the ancient Israelites left Egypt, were first put into writing in the 7th century BC, in the heart of the Judahite hills. It was here that most of the stories contained in the Bible were written down. They bring to life a complex antique world, full of noise and passion, of conflicts and alliances, of heroes and conquests. A story similar to that of all peoples, but one that in this case gave birth to a unique book. In this episode, we are going to explore the origins of the nation that first put the text of the Bible into writing. According to the biblical text, Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt to the land of Canaan, the Holy Land. We see them reconquer the lands of their ancestors and gradually become a sovereign people in their land.
The first verses of the book of Joshua say the following. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua the son of Nun, Moses' minister, Moses my servant is dead. Now therefore arise, go over this Jordan, you and all these people, into the land which I am giving to them, to the people of Israel. Every place that the sole of your foot will tread upon, I have given to you, as I promised to Moses. This is the beginning of the great saga, the great epic of the conquest of Canaan in the book of Joshua. And the Bible tells the story step by step. From here to Jericho, from Jericho to Ai, from Ai to the war with the kings of the south, and then to Hatzor and the kings of the north. And it's a wonderful story, a great saga of war and conquest and bravery. And the question is, did it happen? Did it really happen the way it is described in the text of the Bible, of the book of Joshua?
The Bible describes Joshua primarily as a military leader who was given a mission by God to conquer the land that was promised to the patriarchs and then to Moses. Joshua invaded the territory of Canaan at the head of an enormous army of confederated Israelite tribes. He crossed the Jordan River and attacked and conquered the region's cities one after the other in a lightning war. These conquered cities formed the outlines of a country.
The biblical version presents this conquest as a sort of blitzkrieg. In all, it took 2 weeks, and practically the whole of the population was exterminated. No mercy was shown for the people of Canaan. But we are not told why. We are not told that it was because they worshipped false gods or because they were particularly evil. On the contrary, no reasons are given. What is important is that they were all devoted to destruction, according to the biblical text. The word used is harem, which means that everything must be destroyed in order to be given back to Yahweh. The idea is that God grants them victory, so everything therefore belongs to God.
The conquest followed by the dividing up of Canaan are at the heart of the biblical book of Joshua. According to biblical chronology, this incident occurred in the second half of the 13th century BC. Archaeologists have located and excavated most of the cities referred to in the story. It is therefore necessary to take a closer look at these excavations. The most important site for this part of our investigation is Hazor in Galilee. The Bible describes this as a high-ranking city, the head of all those kingdoms. The archaeological site is being examined by Amnon ben Tor of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He is continuing a task that was begun in the 1950s by the famous archaeologist Yigael Yadin. Some of the remains discovered here are considered to be those of a palace and a temple destroyed in the 13th century BC by a violent conflagration.
And look at the destruction. We are in the entrance to the Chatzor palace of the late Bronze Age, or Canaanite Chatzor. Look at the signs of the destruction, which are to be found everywhere. Look at the melted mud brick. It takes 1300 degrees centigrade to melt a mud brick. Look at the intense heat marked all over the bricks. Look at the white here, which is also an effect of the fire. Look at the wood, the timber. All those signs of the violent destruction of the palace of Chatzor. Look at the cracked basalt stones. Look at this. Normal heat doesn't do this. Only a very, very intense fire. Look at what is happening on the walls. See the ashes, see the wood, signs of the timber here, on the walls. Wherever you look, wherever you go, same signs of destruction.
These layers of destruction appear to provide tangible evidence of the conquest of Canaan by the armies of Joshua. Given the mood of 1950s Israel just after the country's independence, this hypothesis supported the idea that the birth of a nation had to be preceded by a military conquest.
Joshua's destruction of Hazor, the great city of North Canaan referred to in the Bible, was a key step in the conquest of Galilee by the Israelites. Dr. Yadin and his colleagues are hoping to reach the lair where we find the destroyed city. In 3 seasons of excavations, they have already found the remains of a number of Israelite cities that were successively built on the ruins of previous cities. They have discovered precious relics that add to our knowledge of the story and of the way people lived in those times. The Hazor excavation, which will be completed next summer, adds an impressive new chapter to biblical research and to universal knowledge of ancient history, of the link between the Jewish people and the land of Israel.
There was a great enthusiasm for archaeology during this period by a country in search of history. Its leaders, David Ben-Gurion, who was at that time Prime Minister, and former military leaders such as Yigael Yadin or Moshe Dayan. The facts seem to speak for themselves. Similar remains of destruction were to be found in many of the country's archaeological sites. However, the accumulation of conflicting data over the past 50 years sowed the first seeds of doubt. We therefore have to go back to the beginning and re-examine site by site the foundations of the hypothesis of the conquest of the country by Joshua and his armies. It is necessary to refer to the text and the story of the conquest as it is related in the Bible, in particular its most famous battle, that of Jericho. An impressive amount of information is available in relation to Jericho. It is one of the most excavated sites of the Levant. Several expeditions have succeeded each other there since the beginning of the 20th century. How does the Bible tell the story of the capture of Jericho? Everyone is familiar with the method that was used to cause the walls of the city to come tumbling down, the famous trumpets of Jericho. Go round the city 7 times, and the priests shall blow the trumpets. When you hear the sound of the trumpet, all the people shall shout with a great shout, and the walls of the city shall fall flat down. Basing themselves on the Bible, the first researchers believed that some of the remains that were discovered here were those of the city destroyed during the attack by the Israelite armies. But these ruins predate the 13th century BC. The archaeologist Kathleen Kenyon was the first to conclude that at the time suggested by the Bible, there were no walls in Jericho that needed tumbling down. At the time of the conquest of Canaan, Jericho was unoccupied. We therefore have to reconsider all of these elements from another perspective.
So this is not history in the simple sense, and the case of Jericho applies also for other places mentioned in the tradition of the conquest in the book of Joshua. Many of the cities mentioned were not inhabited at all in the late Bronze Age. There was nothing there.
There is another inconsistency. Archaeologists' examination of all the different sites that have been excavated show that the process of destruction was spread over almost a century. In contrast, the Bible refers to a very short-lived operation. While certain cities were indeed destroyed, they were not all destroyed at the same time. What to do now? We have to widen our point of view and take into account the geopolitical situation of the Levant during the same 13th century, and focus on the main player of the period, Egypt. Almost 400 cuneiform tablets dating from the 14th century BC have been discovered in Tel El Amarna in Middle Egypt. They include certain information about the region that we are concerned with. They consist of diplomatic correspondence sent to the pharaohs by the kings of the small city-states of Canaan. A reading of the correspondence shows that the city-states were vassals of Egypt during the relevant period. In fact, from the 15th century to the beginning of the 12th century BC, the land of Canaan was an Egyptian province. Egypt occupied the country, where it set up a network of strongholds. This has been confirmed by the archaeological excavations. One of those strongholds was excavated in the 1920s at Beth Shean, south of the Sea of Galilee. The Amarna letters and the archaeological excavations clearly show that Beth Shean, whose biblical mound dominates the Roman and Byzantine ruins, was an important Egyptian bastion between the 14th and mid-12th centuries.
To understand the way the Egyptians dominated completely the country and the countryside, you have to come here. To a residency like this, there was a strong garrison, there were scribes here, there were soldiers here, there were administrators here, and everything was under the control of the Egyptians, which means that 20 kilometers from here, 30 kilometers from here, if somebody wanted to take some sort of a major economic decision or a major political decision, he needed to come to Beth Shean to get the approval of the Egyptians. They were the masters of the countryside. According to the traditional biblical archaeology, the conquest took place in the late 13th century, in the time of Ramses II. And we have two problems here. The first one is that at that time, Beth Shean was a very strong Egyptian stronghold, with soldiers, with the people that could have been dispatched from here to block any invasion of Canaan. And the second problem is that the Egyptians are still here, about a century after the traditional date of the conquest. How can it be?
So, the archaeological excavations tell us that the conquest did not take place. However, two questions remain unanswered. How can we explain the evidence of destruction that has been found in many of the sites? And what meaning can we give to the list of supposedly conquered cities that are cited in the biblical text? Our investigation will shortly provide the answers.
So the book of Joshua is not history. It's a mythical description. And like the case of the patriarchs and the case of Exodus, it tells the story of the formative stage in the life of the nation. And as such, it is full of divine interventions, bravery, and miracles.
The biblical text tells how, at the request of Joshua, God would help the Israelites win their battle in an entirely miraculous way. He extended the day during the battle by ordering the sun to stand still on Gibeon and the moon to stop in the valley of Ajalon. And the biblical text goes on to say that there was no day like that before it or after it, that Yahweh listened to the voice of a man.
The Joshua epic is the start of a great story that ends up in a story of kingship. The book of Joshua is in fact the Bible's first installment of a story that would ultimately show why Israel chose a king, in the same way that other peoples had done. But it didn't happen overnight. Joshua already prefigures in the Bible as being slightly royal, as he is treated somewhat like a king. But after the story of Joshua,
we find a book called the Book of Judges. They were charismatic leaders who arose during a period that was chaotic and anarchical, a period in which nothing was determined. There was no central power, and, quote, every man did that which was right in his own eyes, according to the formula used in the book. So the Book of Judges is used to show that it is not possible to organize a nation in the absence of a king or a central power. The Book of Judges ends on that finding. It is followed by the story of Samuel, which is the introduction to the history of kingship. Samuel would be the one to choose first Saul and then David as the king of Israel.
David. The biblical text presents David as a herder who was anointed by God. Hence the word Mashiach, or Messiah in Hebrew, the Anointed One. But did David really exist? Many doubt it. An inscription discovered at Tel Dan provides the answer. It refers to a king of Damascus whose defeated enemies included Ahaziah, king of the house of David.
So this is one of the strongest, if not the strongest, proof for the historicity of David. There was a David. The question is not whether there was a David or there was no David. The question is whether the kingdom of David was a great empire.
The Bible clearly refers to an empire, which it describes as a huge territory with Jerusalem at its center. With much ceremony, King David transferred the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem, and thereby made it the capital of the kingdom. Therefore, King David really did exist. There is no doubt about it. He reigned in the 10th century BC. But was his kingdom the vast empire described in the Bible? Our investigation will continue in Jerusalem, the city of David, as it is referred to in the biblical text. Jerusalem is an unusual city, which has been destroyed and rebuilt many times. It is a living city, a difficult terrain for archaeologists. Is it still possible to find signs of David's capital? Given the difficulties, archaeologists have to proceed by going back in time. They begin with the latest remains, those that have been reliably dated, and go back to the older ones whose chronology is still uncertain. This time, our investigation will take us to cemeteries from the end of the monarchical period, which were built outside the city. Israel Finkelstein is going to try to find the remains of the Jerusalem of the 7th century BC.
Well, I haven't been here for 20 years. I don't remember how to pass anymore. It's somewhere over there. Should be. That's okay. During the Iron Age, the time of this cemetery, people buried, the dead were buried outside of the limits of the city. So by plotting the layout of the cemeteries in Jerusalem, what you get, in fact, is some sort of a circle around an empty area with no tombs, and that empty area, the negative print with no tombs in the center, is in fact the area of the city in the Iron Age.
Localizing these necropoli enables a map to be drawn up of the contours of Jerusalem at the end of the 8th and during the 7th centuries, the time of kings Hezekiah and Josiah. But this large city is the late Jerusalem, from the time when Judah was a prosperous state. What about David's city, which is 2 centuries older? The city that we are looking for has to be somewhere within these contours. Our investigation will focus on the ridge called Ir David, to the south of Temple Mount. It is here that archaeologists have been looking for King David's capital since the 19th century.
We are standing on the upper slope, on the upper part of the slope, down to the valley of Kidron. In the lower part, we see 2 or 2.5 houses from the late Iron Age. And above the houses is this very strange, I think, what we call the step structure. These are not steps to climb up a slope. This is just a revetment, a cover of a slope which is very loose, which is made of debris, which might, in a little earthquake or so, collapse down the slope and take with them whatever is standing above them. In the late Bronze Age and in the early Iron Age, there is human activity here, there is human occupation here on a very small scale.
The way I see it, there was a village here in the 10th century, but it was a small one, mainly on this part of the ridge of the city of David, not along the ridge, not all along the ridge, with a very limited population, not fortified and with no monuments.
Well, I agree. I agree that it was a very small place. Iron Age Jerusalem was a very small, and this does not agree, or archaeology and text describe 2 different natures of sites, not the existence, but the natures of the sites.
Unlike the great city of the 7th century, David's Jerusalem was a simple mountain village covering 3 to 4 hectares. We can agree that David did not build a prestigious capital. In the Bible, he is above all described as a conqueror. But what about his son, the illustrious Solomon, whom the Bible tells us was a great builder?
The biblical story of Solomon reads a bit like a story from the Arabian Nights. Solomon is the wise king par excellence, he of the famous judgment of Solomon. But he was also someone who was so famous that even the Queen of Sheba came to visit him, to meet with the man whose wisdom was talked about even in far-flung Africa. Solomon's empire is said to have been so enormous that no other empire could compete. And Solomon was also the builder of the temple, which allowed the God of Israel to find a resting place within Israel.
Discovering the Temple of Solomon, an impossible task today. Religious sensitivities, in particular in respect of the Temple Mount, preclude the investigation of certain areas. We therefore have to look for clues in the bowels of the city of David.
You see, we are standing inside what is left of the Middle Bronze Age fortifications, and you can see how high they still stand, 3,700 years. Part is destroyed, but part survived, and the lower parts are even better preserved.
What's amazing is the size of the stones. Some of them are a few tons in weight, right?
Yeah, these two stones, for example, reach, let's say, 2 to 3 tons each.
And what's interesting here, all these talks that, because we are in Jerusalem, monuments could have been simply eradicated by later builders, robbed and so on and so forth. Here we see that this is impossible. When you have a monument like this, something remains.
Any big building from any period of time left after it, whether destroyed by nature or destroyed by man, in one way or another, parts standing and parts in a state of collapse. You must find something.
Like David's Jerusalem, Solomon's capital was an insignificant village. But what about the rest of the kingdom? In the 1960s, the archaeologist Yigael Yadin undertook excavations in Megiddo, one of our books of stone. Before him, in the 1920s and 30s, the Oriental Institute of the University of Chicago had already carried out a thorough campaign of excavations, during which the remains of a gate to the city were discovered. This gate, of which only one side remains, has an unusual design. It is a pathway that is framed on each side by 3 chambers. It is therefore known as a 6-chambered gate. Yigael Yadin did not choose Megiddo by chance. His previous excavations at the Hazor site resulted in the discovery of a similar gate. Yadin then turned to another site, that of Gezer. This time, he only went so far as to consult the report of an archaeologist who explored the site at the beginning of the 20th century. Yadin discovered a similar gate in the design for a later small fort. A gate that was similar in design and size to those of Megiddo and Hazor. For Yigael Yadin, the conclusion was obvious. Megiddo, Gezer, and Hazor all carried the signs of the same architect, King Solomon. Yigael Yadin was guided in his investigation by a biblical verse. The verse tells us that Solomon raised a levy to build the house of Yahweh, and his own house, and the wall of Jerusalem, and Hazor, and Megiddo, and Gezer. So, Solomon was a builder king at the head of an empire. When writing about David and Solomon, the Bible serves as a history book. But once again, reality proves to be slightly more complicated. Recent stratigraphic investigation has shown that the Megiddo Gate was built after the Hazor one. It has also been shown that this type of gate was already in existence in the 8th century. Israel Finkelstein is troubled by these inconsistencies. Everything has to be reconsidered. A new chronology based on scientific procedures will have to be determined for the strata and monumental vestiges. Archaeological methods have evolved since the excavations led by Yigael Yadin. Carbon-14 dating techniques are more and more accurate. The margin of error has been reduced to 30 to 50 years. Organic samples are therefore taken from the layers of destruction in many sites, including Megiddo. They include seeds and olive stones, which allow for a more reliable dating due to their more limited life cycles. The exact sciences, physics, chemistry, statistics, are brought into play. The results provide a drastic reversal of everything we ever knew about David and Solomon and their times.
So here's the situation. If we have the Mound of Megiddo, and we partition it into conventional and low chronology, okay, with the two strata. This one was supposed to be in the 11th century BC, and now according to the radiocarbon results, we definitely see that this is impossible, that it falls into the 10th century. And the meaning is that the stratum which had been dated to the 10th century cannot be 10th century, it goes to the 9th century BC.
That is, a whole century after Solomon. A set of certitudes based on deductions have collapsed. The pieces of the puzzle no longer fit together. After our reconsideration of David's empire, it is now Solomon's turn.
What is the situation with the 10th century now?
It's confusing. In Jerusalem, it's a small village, nothing monumental, no real evidence for big capital.
Despite the biblical evidence.
Of course, no evidence for a great Solomonic capital ruling over a great state, rich state, and so on. And here at Megiddo, the buildings, the monumental buildings which had been described as the symbol of Solomonic greatness, in fact, date a bit later. They don't date to the time of Solomon. They don't date to the 10th century. So we are in a situation of a complete negative picture, negative evidence from coast to coast.
And yet there are magnificent buildings here. And the question is, what kingdom were they related?
Yeah, they are dated a bit later, I think, but the question again is what's going on in the 10th century?
We have a real historical problem here. We have to come up with a new explanation.
As often happens in such cases, just as uncertainties reach their climax, a new clue is discovered. Norma Franklin has been part of the Megiddo expedition for years. She noticed that the stonework of a palace that Yadin attributed to Solomon displayed very unusual mason's marks. She looked through the records and reports of old excavations to find out if similar masons' marks were to be found elsewhere. She found that such masons' marks were only recorded in one other building, only one building in the whole country. The building is to be found in Samaria, a city located in a mountainous region. Like Megiddo, this site is one of the wonders of the Kingdom of Israel. The solution to our enigmas lies here, amongst these verdant hills. Samaria was excavated on 2 occasions last century. Many remnants from the Roman era were found from a time when the city was called Sebastia. It was built by a king named Omri in the 9th century BC and was the capital of the Kingdom of Israel. Vast monuments that were built by this king and his descendants have been found here. The Bible considers the Omri dynasty as debauched and renegade kings, the infamous cursed kings. But sources outside the Bible provide another image altogether. Omri's son Ahab is seen as being a great monarch. The missing piece of the puzzle appears to have been found.
When we come to Samaria and we see the monumental building, palace built by Omri, it's so out of keeping with what we have been told, that the Omride kingdom was the breakaway kingdom, it was a small kingdom. In fact, it's quite different. We can visibly see that we're dealing with a monumental building, a building that needed a strong and powerful king in order to establish it. So this is telling us that we cannot just follow the biblical account. We have to look around us and see what else we have from the same time period. Everything is telling us that we're dealing with a strong and powerful king, a king who had at his fingertips the resources to build an incredible palace. So we're looking at a very powerful kingdom, a very strong king.
What places like Samaria and Megiddo tell us when we look at the palaces at those places is very clear. That the kingdom which was the richest and the strongest and the best connected internationally was the northern kingdom, Israel, while Judah to the south was small, poor, and marginal.
These conclusions are quite surprising. The sister kingdom to the north, Israel, with its rich soils and its temperate climate, was prosperous and developed. Whereas the kingdom to the south, Judah, with its rocky hills and its tiny population, only developed as far as a subsistence economy. They both share the land of Canaan. One was strong, the other was weak. And yet it was the weak kingdom, the younger sibling Judah, that would write the family history and would credit itself with the successes of the great kings of the north.
When you read the history of these two kingdoms, Israel and Judah, in the Bible, you soon realize that the kings of the north lag way behind in the stakes. Each king is evaluated, and regardless of what the northern kings do, they always obtain a very poor rating. quite simply because the story is written from a southern perspective. That is, the kings are always judged from the perspective that Jerusalem is the only legitimate sanctuary. The kings of the north therefore have no chance of obtaining a good rating in the Book of Kings.
How can we explain such a paradoxical situation? History provides the answer. In the 8th century, Assyrian ambitions destroyed the dreams of the kingdom of the north. The kingdom of Israel was swept from the map, and Judah remained alone to defend the Israelite heritage. Jerusalem became the city where all of this would be played out. We are now at the end of the 7th century BC. A young king, Josiah, that we have learnt by now, reigns in Judah. He has the mission of conquering the territories of the lost kingdom of Israel. He believes he has both the means to succeed and the duty. The Assyrian Empire was in decline. All of its efforts were focused on problems that had arisen in the northeast.
The dream of a united Israel was not possible to fulfill as long as the Assyrian Empire was there. But when the Assyrians pull out, things become possible. And Josiah, king of Judah, embarks on this great idea, great adventure. He plans to take over the territories of the now destroyed northern kingdom. And by doing that, he plans to reunify the people of Israel, all of them, under one king of the lineage of David in Jerusalem. And here the story of the book of Joshua, the conquest of Joshua, and the story of the great empire of David and Solomon play an important role, because the conquest of Joshua delineates the territories that Josiah wishes to take over. And the great empire of David and Solomon gives the model for the great Israelite empire to come.
We are almost at the end of this story. The biblical saga of the conquest, written in the past tense, provides a promise for the future, an ideal. Joshua's conquest is in fact the conquest that Josiah hoped to achieve.
So while Josiah's story in the Bible is quite brief, there is no doubt at all that the narrator wants to present him as the new David. From the very beginning of the story, we read that Josiah did that which was right in the eyes of the Lord, and later that he walked in the ways of David, his father, and didn't turn aside to the right hand or to the left. It will be shown, in fact, that in all that he did, he was the worthy successor to the founder of the dynasty, leaving the reader with no other conclusion other than we are dealing with a new David.
According to the Bible, the divine commitment to the dynasty of David was an unconditional one. That promise, recorded in the biblical text, makes the mission of his descendant Josiah an inescapable one. Its plan is the realization of that promise. But once again, the tides of fate decided otherwise. A tragedy was in the making at Megiddo. Egypt, which had been forgotten about, came back on the scene with a vengeance. Pharaoh Necho II summoned Josiah and killed him.
The death of Josiah completely changed the concept of the Messiah. Up until the time of Josiah, all the successors to David were known as the Mashiach, the Anointed One. And this was really a symbol of their legitimate succession to the throne of Judah. But with the death of Josiah, everything changed. All the promises that had been believed to be embodied in Josiah were suddenly disproved by events. The death of Josiah caused a huge change in the idea of a transformation from royal succession to a future hope.
For the peoples of antiquity, the idea that the time to come could be better than what they lived on a daily basis, that history has a meaning and an end, was a new concept. Today, this faith in messianic times is at the core of the Jewish liturgy. A king of the house of David will one day come to realize Josiah's dream, an earthly kingdom that will carry out the divine mission. David, King of Israel, lives forever. This creed has generated an unbreakable form of hope. It is the third pillar of Judaism. In the next and last episode, we will explore the origins of the Israelites and try to understand how a collection of different stories were transformed into a single book, the Bible.